Orleans Museum of Art, and we're delighted to welcome you. Oh, come on, no, please. We're delighted to welcome you to this evening's Artist Perspective with Mr. Willie Birch. So I think the way this evening is going to go is that Willie's going to share some slides of his work, and then I think we'll have a conversation about his work in our current exhibition, Changing Course: Reflections on New Orleans Histories. Willie Birch is certainly one of the best respected artists in this city. He has degrees from the Southern University of New Orleans and the Maryland College Institute of Art. He's in numerous collections, too many to count or name tonight, but his work has recently been shown in museums across the country, including in a version of the Whitney's first exhibition after they opened in their new space in New York. And of course, we have had the good fortune to not only work with Willie on a number of occasions, but have some wonderful pieces in our permanent collection as well, one of which I think he'll talk about tonight. But we're delighted that he was able to be a part of Changing Course. If you haven't seen it, of course, you're able to see it this evening. And there are some wonderful new pieces that were made over the past, really 10 months specifically for this exhibition that were in reality years in the making, but they represent, I think, a pretty big departure from his more established work over the past 15 years. And so we'll certainly talk about that tonight. But without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mr. Willie Birch.
First, I'd like to thank everybody for coming. It's always interesting to see old faces and new faces, particularly young artists. I treasure my role, particularly in New Orleans, in terms of mentoring, and I find that New Orleans have a lot of great young artists. I don't see the support they should be receiving, but the talent is here. And since this is a very unique city and we choose to live here, I wish that the collecting community would catch up to what young artists are doing. I don't call myself an activist, but I was in the civil rights movement at 18 years old, and that has helped to shape why I do what I do. So tonight what I'm going to do is that I decided that since most people don't know my trajectory, my history, that I would show about 30 slides, and I'll give you an overview of that. The key is that I work in series. So I will work my way through a body of work anywhere from 30 pieces to 50 pieces to what? They sound prolific. And through that process, I'll move on. So tonight, I'm going to start with the first piece that I donated to Noma. And this was 1976. And the reason how that came about was because one of my graduate teachers who thought I was very talented said, Willie, if you think you're so good, see if you could donate to some of this. See if you can donate some of this stuff. I didn't know how difficult that was to donate to museums. So anyway, the first place you're going to start is always in your home base. So I presented a group of pieces to Noma, and I ran into the problem of that, and I'll show you that piece. The problem was, the name of the piece is, the series is called Land of Blacks. And this piece is called Homage to Kitty Poindexter, who was my grandmother and was this incredible inspiration in terms of telling me that to do what my passion was. And so all my life, I had my grandmother there to counteract my mother and anybody else that said, this is a dead-end street in terms of being an artist. So paying homage to her in graduate school was very, very important. The piece is based on, I'm looking at Egyptian art, I'm looking at the map of Africa, and I realized that somehow abstraction allows you to be inventive due to the process. The problem was that my mother and them could not understand what I was doing. And so since I was trained in terms of the figurative tradition, I constantly am trying to find a way to do the figure that basically represent who I am, and that is a person of African American ancestry. So anyway, this is the first piece. This is like a piece about 6 feet by 7 feet. It's all based on the number 3. I'm listening to John Coltrane music. I come from the philosophy that content drives form. They have an equal duality in what I do. When you go to school, I went to Maryland Institute, they're constantly stressing process, craft. But I find that in New Orleans, especially if you deal with the music and you grow up around the music, it's always whatever's happening in the society, particularly with brass band music, that is the form that dictates what you play, how you play. So I find that through my DNA, New Orleans has always been a part of my process, okay? And part of me finding a vehicle through, within the process that dictate what I'm really trying to say. So let's go on to the site. This is 1982. I began to really look at Africa. In New York, I had some problems initially because I was always interested in Africa. And my peers were constantly looking, they wanted to be American artists. But somehow, when you're from this Caribbean environment, there's something about trying to connect to that part of you that has been denied was a struggle. So I started hanging with Dominicans and Puerto Ricans, and because they were very much connected to their roots, where the African American artists before that were more interested in trying to fit into, as far as I was concerned, a non-objective European understanding of aesthetics, okay? So these, I would look at people in the streets, knowing what I'm doing now, and I'm showing you this, except I would also be looking at traditional African sculpture and seeing these people's faces, and then using that as the vehicle by which I would do these portraits. And these things just would run out of me. I would just do them until, okay. This is a friend of mine, and I showed this piece because he's a great poet. His name is Quincy Troop, and Quincy was somebody who, when I was in Southern Baton Rouge my first year, Quincy was at Grambling, and we met at a football game and became lifelong friends. So somehow in New York, in the 70s, we walking down the street and we look at each other and we still remember hanging out in Baton Rouge. So anyway, so again, but Quincy has this incredible face, plus he's gap mouth. He has all the things that I'm looking for in terms of portraiture. And at the same time, I'm connecting with the fact that we still look like we could be on the continent. This piece here is the late 80s, early 90s. What happened was that in the 80s, I was always looking for a vehicle to find my own medium. And I came to the World's Fair in 1980 something. And I went to the St. Louis Cathedral, and I see this 15th century papier mache crucifix. And I said, I got it. I can make this connection between, although there's the flow tradition and all of that, and think about paper is a fascinating medium because, and also by this time, I'd gone to Egypt too. And you see that paper, the way we deal with in this country, is something that has no value. And my belief was that what has value is things that you save and collect, which it's not a monetary value. It's just something that connects you to something that's about your survival. And so, as an artist, that is very, very important in terms of what we consider precious. And so, this piece here, I was at what's called a bimbe. And this sister, it's called a priestess. This sister came out, and in terms of her ritual, there was something about her that just captivated me to the point that I went home and I started doing these life-size papier-mache pieces. At the same time, I was also very interested in folk art. And there was something, the folk art at this time I felt was also more alive than formal process art. So, but since I'm very socially conscious, there was an incident that happened in Miami, and it was called Do Nothing Day, and it was based on the birthday of Martin Luther King. So, and there was a riot. So this piece, although you're looking at an appliance store in terms of what's there, if you look inside and look at the imagery that's on the television, you begin to see, and the name of the piece is, what's the name of the piece? Martin Luther King, McDonald's, and Miami's Burning. Okay? Now, I thought it was very interesting because it was always one of my favorite pieces within this very folkloric tradition that I was trying to use. Okay, this piece, the same thing. How many people know Spike Lee's movie, School Days? It's one of my favorite Spike Lee movies. And at the end of the movie, there's this part where the brother says, "Wake up." And it's about fraternities, and I'm sure whites who don't understand something about the sorority and fraternity system, that particularly as it plays out in black colleges, it's an incredible performance. It's an incredible ritual that takes place in terms of your initiation. So that movie I can relate to in terms of Spike Lee. But the idea at the end of this young man, wake up. And this piece is in the collection at Tulane University. Okay, in terms of also connecting to papier mache, these are two little girls which are life-size, papier mache, and there is in Congo tradition, I don't know how many people have read Robert Farris Thompson's book, Flash of the Spirit, but it's a book that we all should read and begin to understand the connection between, particularly between Cuba, Brazil, and New Orleans in terms of African retentions. So the idea of the Nkisi, which is that chest cavity, which activates these pieces, and the idea of these two little girls, I don't know if you know, Louisiana has more twins than any place in the United States, which basically comes, and the place in Africa that has them, it would be Benin, would be Nigeria. So there are all of these connections that I'm making in my head and in my consciousness in terms of what I'm trying to grasp and figure out the type of art I would make. Okay, this piece here, there was the Anita Thomas, Clarence Thomas situation. And I wish I could have shown the slide from the back, because the vote was 49 and 50 to 51. But it was incredible the fact that Thompson would take the place of Thurgood Marshall. That was powerful to me. And of course, during the hearing, the things that Anita Hill said about Clarence Thomas was absolutely abominable. Because it like coke hair, it was very surreal. So it was perfect to make art out of. And there is this woman named Miss Boucher who owns the right to Snoopy. This piece was published in New York. And she heard about me and she thought I was a woman. So she came to Brooklyn. She said, no man would do this. So anyway, she came to, and she walked into my studio and she said, I'll take it. I don't care what I have to pay for it. So it was the first time I got $9,000 for a piece of paper. You know, which also was part of the point that I was trying to show in terms of value. How do you value things? This piece here deals with the environment. The horn is a didgeridoo, comes out of Australia, Aborigines, and has this real earthy sound. There's a long story about this piece because when they built the new wing to Noma, and Bill Fagan and them came to New York, they bought this piece, but Miss Wiseman, she wanted this piece for herself. So they had to make a deal, okay? So the museum kept the piece called The Stoops, which is about growing up at 2089 LaSalle Street, and Miss Wiseman took this piece. But it's about what are we doing to Mother Earth? What are we doing to this beautiful planet? So my work has that kind of social consciousness, and that's what drives the work. This one is, if you don't know where you come from, how you know where you're going? It's a takeoff on some levels on Jacob Lawrence's piece, if you've seen the little girls at the blackboard. But at the same time, the Children's Museum in Chicago owns this piece. And if you start reading it, there's a rhythm that goes on, because in the end, I think we get to South Africa. South Africa was very much in the news then. So the key that I like to say, my work is like John Coltrane's music. You will never get it one time. So if you keep coming back, you will keep finding all of these beautiful levels that's within the work that will hopefully take you someplace else, which eventually is what is your relationship to all of this? This piece here comes out of an experience. I did a residency in Kenya, Nairobi, and when I came back, the second part of the residency was to do this piece called Spirit House. This is an A-frame house, but the deal was that I sent out a letter internationally to artists who wanted to participate in this concept called home, and 103 artists responded. And then I went into the Sculpture Center in New York, and we did this piece. The inside there are stars, so again, I'm only showing one slide because we don't have that much time. But this piece is owned by the Contemporary Museum in Delaware. I think it's the only permanent piece in the collection. But the idea was that, again, it's all paper. Okay, this piece is called Batty Moo. It's a whole series of pieces, particularly in terms of the way we dance, particularly black people. We stick our butt out, and just like it's an African form that comes out of our tradition. And these three little girls were dancing, and there was something very, 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 very beautiful about it. This young man, this is called Dapper Young Man. We happened to, I saw him at this, I don't know whether it was a concert, but he was within that New Orleans tradition. He was beautiful. So I told him I'd like to do a portrait. And I've moved back to New Orleans now, and I'm making the transition from paper to wherever I'm trying to go. And so this piece came out of that experience. And his name is Lois Eli. And it was a beautiful experience because it's life size. This is Old Man with Dog. Again, I was just as interested in the color around him as he and the dog, and that is he's bathed within this what we call cerulean blue, which we know would be in some people would call that Egyptian blue. So I'm constantly, symbolism, it's loaded, metaphor is loaded. It's all a language within a language. Boy with blue hair, number 2. There's another one that, the thing that I found interesting was that a lot of this work I couldn't sell in New Orleans, but I could sell it in New York, I could sell it in California. But it's always very interesting about what parts of my work that they would buy and what they want. So, okay, this is called the Art Dealer. This is a body of work based on the black male. And this is Harry Jones, whose wife is Stella Jones, the gallery owner. And Harry was a beautiful brother. And just before he died, I asked him, I said, Harry, I'd like to do a portrait of you because I'm trying to fit into New Orleans. What I left out of that was in 1994, I got a Guggenheim to come to New Orleans. And when I got here, I realized that this city had changed. And so for me to do paper mache, it didn't make any more sense. So I began to transition into black and white, eventually black and whites and whatever. Okay, chef with knife. The joke's always, what happens when you see a black man with a knife? We have a whole stereotypical idea that that's unacceptable. But this brother was incredibly dark, very beautiful in his white. And I was at a wedding, and I just walked up to him. I said, man, could you put that knife in your hand? Because I really want to do a piece on you. This is called No Tears for Ernie Cato. Ernie Cato had one of the biggest funerals in New Orleans. And I became artist in resident at Jazz and Heritage for 2 years. I was the first visual artist to have a residency there. So just the idea of having that honor was, and looking at the music and seeing what I get out of the music was really important. The beauty of New Orleans is that the funerals are not based on whether you're the mayor, whether you're some big politician or what. It's based upon the community. So Ernie Cato had one of the biggest funerals I've ever seen in my life. It must be 7 blocks long. Yeah. And I grew up with Ernie Cato because I grew up in this place called the Magnolia Project. So you've heard of Mother-in-Law, you've heard all these tunes. Okay, well, I knew Ernie Cato. So, and we always was amazed that he lived as long as he did. Okay, this piece here, it was interesting because I did a book with one of the gentlemen in the audience named Mac Sacatini, and we were both at this funeral for Mr. Dejean. And I'd never heard this cacophony of music as it came from underneath the overpass, the underpass. We were under the underpass. But the clarinets were just, I mean, they were going. And it was the best jazz funeral for a musician that I'd ever really experienced. And so he asked me to collaborate on his book. And what came out, we started trading notes and found out that although we didn't know each other, we were interested in documenting the same thing in terms of the city. Okay, this one, what's this called? Yeah, Martin Luther King Day, right. Okay, I think it speaks for itself. It's like 6 feet high by maybe 8 feet, and these are all large sheets of paper. Okay, if you know anything about the idea of black people still waiting for 40 acres and a mule, so when you're in a funeral sometime here, you see a mule, and most people who don't understand what that means is that we're still waiting you know, the 40 acres. So there is social commentary within this city in terms of how we use language, and it's absolutely incredible experience when you really get into it. Okay, this was after Katrina. I've always been a Piranesi. I'm sure you've heard of Piranesi. He was the Italian brother that did the ruins in Rome. And so here we were after Katrina, and you're looking at these buildings, and they're beautiful in terms of there's something that you could render. In terms of the devastation, that's a whole nother level. But in terms of something that has a graphic quality that you really can get into, there's something very beautiful about this, but yet there's also something very destructive. So this is a view. These are two views of the same building where I put things together. Again, Africa is always amongst us within the ironworks. There's a language within that, within the geometric, the diamond shapes. It's the Congo, which means crossroads of life. The city is loaded with all of these references, and it's obvious to me and most of us that that was left for us to understand how to get us out of the situation we were in. So if you want to really understand New Orleans, study like if you look at the top of the St. Louis Cathedral, I don't know if you know that, there are two diamond shapes. And there's also this arrow-like piece that goes up. Well, guess who put those things up there? They were the enslaved people. So you're in the most African city in America, and there is something about it that, in terms of what I feel the ancestors were leaving us, and if you're just intuitive to that, then you know it's a way. It's what makes our art unique. It's what makes the music unique. It's my work is filled with syncopation. You know, it's all about the rhythms. You know, there's this three. It's constantly moving around in terms of what you're dealing with. So there are all of these different levels that I'm trying to force the viewer to begin to interact with. So, so when you look at this gate and you see that heart-like shape, that means the same. It means also another way of, if you don't know where you're coming from, how you know where you're going. So we have these things that we take for granted as decorative symbols. They have nothing to do with being decorative. Okay, this piece here is called My Neighbor's House, and anybody that knows anything about these flowers, they are bell flowers, but they are poisonous. But they're very beautiful. So that intrigued me in terms of beware, okay? It was after Katrina, this beautiful metal forged fence fell down, and it reminded me of railroad tracks, but just the sheer beauty of these layers of metal laying on top of each other, all, you know, but just something that's just very, very beautiful that attracted me. Okay, now, this is getting to the old Priya Street, which you've seen in the gallery. These are portraits of what I call the silence. And it's interesting in terms of, for me, was to depict these people in terms of what they really look like, not some, you know, most people we want to clean up. And it was interesting with certain people because I asked one person in up here, and she went home and dyed her hair half red and blonde. And she came back, she said she was ready now for me to do her portrait. I said, that's not what I want, babe. You know? So anyway, she came back the next day, and I got exactly what I want. Her name is Mary, and I think she's gorgeous. I think she's absolutely beautiful, very stately, very African looking in terms of her body language, her poise. When she puts her hands on her hip, it's that power position, which some of us know. You know, when black folks put their hand on their hip, I'm looking at at my sister here, Troy. She knows what that is. When the sister put their hand on me here, you know, all of these are signifiers in terms of who we are. This piece here, all of this is coming off that property. I started finding bones underneath my house. I got this property and these bones. And then I realized that there was something about bones that I want to do. And there's also sweetgrass. Sweetgrass is, you see it all over the place, which we take for granted. So my idea was to, what could I do to make a piece out of it? It means it's letting the work dictate, the content dictate the form. So since this is a narrative storytelling piece, it became very interesting because the thing that kept coming to me was one of the things that I couldn't find any information on until maybe, a year and a half ago, and that was the slavery vote of 1811. And I looked on Google, and we don't talk about that, but it was the largest slavery vote in the history of America. And it took place in Louisiana. And my thing was, what would have happened if those folks had taken New Orleans? It would be very different today. So that was very, very powerful. But this piece is done for a generation not yet born. So it's done for the children out there. There are no recognizable imagery, but the symbolism and the way it flows naturally is what I was very interested in. And it's 296 inches long and 6 inches, and it was supposed to be 300, but I somehow miscalculated. And this piece here is called Waiting for a Serious Conversation on the History of the South. It's been the hallmark piece of the show. And it was not part of the old Prior Street series, but it's a part of another space. But it speaks to where we are, because there's something very, very beautiful and there's something very solid. But yet we're afraid to really talk about race, class. We're afraid. But if we don't get that, people, we're going to continue to have to really redo this over and over and over again. So as an artist, that's my job. My job is to make beautiful things that hopefully forces you to begin to, what is your role in all of this? How do you fit into all of this? Where are we trying to go as human beings?
Thank you, Willie. Yeah, I mean, we can start with this piece. I mean, this was kind of the inspiration for beginning the conversation with Willie to be a part of the show, and then somewhat paradoxically ended up not really being in the show because we decided to focus on the work that you had done at Old Prior or inspired by Old Prior. And there was something that you said, just show of hands, how many people have already seen Changing Course, the exhibition? Okay, most of you, good. So there are a number of pieces with the bones and the sweetgrass that look quite different. But it occurred to me when you were speaking about your desire to kind of use paper early on in your career as this kind of thing that we discard, but that you make precious, that has been something that you've done in almost every project, with the crawfish mounds I'm thinking of, for example, and with the bones here. Could you talk a little bit more about that, how, why you decided to do something with the bones, what they meant to you?
Well, bones have so much weight in terms of history, and there is something about them that are magical. So the idea that once I started finding these things and I came up with how I could use them, I went to Miss Chase, Dookie Chase restaurant. And Miss Chase and I have been knowing each other since I was 18 years old. But it was fascinating because I started having her and her workers, and I involved because this is the idea of Old Prairie Project was a community project. I wanted to involve, I have people in the audience here who are part of the garden. It's all a part of this one big collective, but it's not me as an artist who are really dictating this. It becomes the community that also dictates what this thing will eventually look like. But, so the bones, you can look at them metaphorically in terms of people say, what is about voodoo? You can say, you know, like it's ancestor worship. They carry all kinds of history and weight in terms of what they represented. And so within the quilt piece that you saw, the bones represent the bodies of people who have been either damaged, because some of the bones are broken, some of the bones, but if you can imagine the slaughter and the violence of what took place on that levee, and then when you get into the brutality of the history of that experience, it begins to, bones became this perfect metaphor for man's inhumanity to man. So the bones, I don't know if I could go beyond that at this point with it, but the thing I can say is that bones are metaphors, paper are metaphors for fragility, but everything I do, colors are symbols. The black and whites, if I'm not rounding, came out of the idea of when I decided to go into black and white. I started looking at Elizabeth Catholic. I started looking at Charles White. I started looking at Romette Bearden. I started looking at Jacob Lawrence. And I would say the three males in particular that is the beginning, I think, of what we call African American art in terms of America, in terms of the modern tradition. And what did they use? They all used paper. So since I don't see myself as something new, I see myself as a continuum. So if I'm a continuum, then I'm going to take whatever legacy that they have created off of, and I'm going to build on that and see where it goes. And the fact that I do, it will become new. And I keep telling young artists, if you really just get into who you are, you will find something that's new, because you are new. You don't have to go around looking for it. It's right in front of you. It's always in front of you. So here we have, and the beauty of those three artists in particular, you can put Miss Catholic in there too, is that they all lived in New Orleans at one point. Miss Catholic is the one who integrated this museum. I don't know if you know that. When she was at Dillard, now she got fired. Charles White won a prize here, and he never received it because when he came to receive the prize, they found out that he was African American. It's the 40s. Okay? Bearden Jazz Series comes out of here. Okay? Jake, when he did his foundation grant for Douglas, Dodge, whatever that organization was that was giving grants to black people, the Rosenwald Foundation, I believe. He came to New Orleans. So there is a legacy here of artists who have come through here. And all of those people's work is narrative. All those people's work is about the human condition. And they are, you can put Norman Lewis in there, but they all are the people that I have had personal relationships with. And also they are the people who very much allows me to be who I am. Because they did not do work for money. They did work because they wanted to create things so that people like me would have some way to find out not only who we are, but what was our possibilities. So that's the big core. That's what makes me who I am. And that, you know, so each time I build on that, it's saying, okay, all right, now catch this. So it's like my show out there. I'm telling these other artists, okay, come on, catch it. You know, I'm daring you because you are better than I am. You got more skills than I have. So I'm saying, come on, because this is a great city and it has enough uniqueness that you don't have to invent it. It's all there for you to see, grab, and make things that are just so different than the rest of the United States that eventually it has to be recognized. The closest thing to New Orleans in terms of creating a real art form, I think, is Cuba, which came out of that revolution. And I really think that I'm looking at some of these young artists, is that they have the opportunity to create something that's unique to here. Because 300-year anniversary, it's like, okay, now we could clean the slate and move on forward to wherever we have to go as artists and as human beings and make something that's unique to here. And just like the music, in terms of adding syncopation, which changed the whole nature of music as we know in terms of world music, we have the same possibility, plus we using the same elements because it's in our DNA. So we don't have to go out and invent it. You know, we use the same, you know, like the shotguns, there's a word which most of us should know, fractals. You can break it up in as many pieces as you want. When you put it back together, it's still the same whole. That is New Orleans. That's in the music, that's in the dance, that's in the visuals, but the visuals has never been recognized as part of that cultural manifestation. I'm saying it is. And I'm out to show you that it is. And saying, run with it. And because it's all here. And if we do that, we're gonna make a great cultural form that's unique to here as young visual artists. Because that's the missing piece now. It's the visual arts.
You just mentioned history, legacy, tricentennial, and in our conversations about changing course, you've sort of compared it to a time capsule, thinking about how if in another 300 years people look back and see what we did at this moment, it says something about where we are. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, in terms of, I was very honored that Russell asked me to be a part of this work, and I must have had 4 exhibitions here. I've been in 4 exhibitions here at this point. But I felt really honored because what Old Priya gave me in terms of the ability to take a neighborhood that was being gentrified and use art as a tool to empower the people that was there and to give them a sense of their power and also empower me became very, very important. So what I did is that I asked my artist friends, because most of us work by ourselves, let's form a group, and the idea that this neighborhood embraced us and we learned from each other. And so some people say the garden wouldn't last. They thought that the neighborhood would trash it. The garden is still there. The stories that are coming out of the neighborhood is unbelievable because if you know anything about this area, it's called the Cut. You got Old Priya, New Priya, and Priya. Can you imagine that? Old wrong, new wrong. And across the street on the other side of Galvez were plantations. So historically, this is a really incredible piece of property. And it's like a jigsaw. So I really think it's a perfect place for an artist, and it's the perfect community to really lay down something that's very, very unique. Because I'm worried about my city as it transitions to whatever the forces are doing to it at this level. I worry about segregation. I worry about us becoming more divided. I worry about all of these, particularly black folks in particular, being pushed to the east. Because I saw what happened to Queens in New York. Like Queens was this very beautiful middle-class place, and now it's drug-infested. And so we have a history of gentrifying areas, changing areas, where Manhattan is supposed, that's all people talk about. But you got East New York, got all these places, and you push black people into these pockets, and then you expect them to be very human. That's not the way life works. So, and people are gonna survive. So as someone who's interested in social issues, it's become very, very, and then what's happening to the environment? What are we doing? You know, I mean, so there are a lot of issues. I'm reading this dude, Heidegger now. This is the 1930s philosopher. And it's interesting because he called this time emergency. And emergency means that if the artists are really true to being an artist, not someone who does billboards or whatever for whatever the power structure, if one deals with their present time and the issues that confront them in this present time, that is the emergency. That is your role. So what happens that is that the viewer will interpret that for their own use, and then that's their emergency, and then then change is created. So so this is not a new thing it's not a new journey. It's just that I happen to be one of the people now who's trying to say artists are gods. We are important. We've always been important. We are spiritual people. And so let's not act like that doesn't have any real validity in terms of changing. Michelangelo was an incredible person. He was for Protestant. You know, I mean, that's part of his problem. You know, he was against the Catholic Church. You know, I mean, so got him in trouble. So why, you know, and here we got with the abuse that's happening within the Catholic Church now. These are real issues, and they're reflecting of all of us. Our president is reflecting of all of us. So he's our president. But I like the idea of the two funerals a day, Aretha Franklin and John McCain, because they're both in their own way are sending another message in terms. They're talking about ideals, the American ideals. Are we going to live up to that all people are created equal, that we all in this boat together? Are we going to, as McCain said, is it going to evolve into tribalism? I mean, you look at what's going on in Germany if you read the paper. This is happening all over the world. And so, as an artist, that is my job, to make sense of that. As my mentor said, Aretha Castle Haley said, in 1961, she said, Willie, the artist had 1 foot in poverty and 1 foot in aristocracy. The money people won't give you the money, but your job is to put that down, because getting back to what Russell was talking about, if I make relevant art, and if you start looking at the people who I consider making relevant art, Van Gogh. Van Gogh's problem was that he was painting middle class people. Well, that's why he didn't buy his stuff. You know? I mean, when you start looking at the history of Goya, when you start, you know, I mean, looking at certain artists within, that is the work that holds up. Not this decorative stuff that looks good over your sofa. That's not our job, is to put it on over your sofa so that, you know, you got a Willie Birch. No, the job is that it's supposed to inform the viewer. So therefore, it becomes an icon within itself. And that becomes its value. And we have a precious history in Western art and art in particular, in terms of what art really is supposed to be and what it means to every last one of us as human beings. And I think that we're in real jeopardy now. I worry about a lot of the program. What Picasso said, you know, you don't do all about the past unless it's going to make reflection to the present. So why are we making art if it does not reflect our experience now? Unless you're trying to make some money. And what does that mean if you make the money? How enriching is that? So, an artist, young artist told me, they said, Willie Birch, you're suicidal. I said, well, hey, you know, so that's what you do. Maybe this is part of my mission. But here I am in this citadel, you know, of collecting art. But I worry about it. I worry about the forces that pay for the art. Because are they really trying to show the art of the time frame that we live in? Are they really trying to just put some stuff in here that just is not really relevant to what the human condition is about? So that particular piece, the conversation about the history of the South, becomes very, very important. And I think it's a monster, as we would say. I think it's a brilliant piece, even though I did it. and I don't have a problem with ego at 75. The deal is that, and I'm looking at other young artists who are doing relevant work, sitting in this audience. But until we find people who are really serious about collecting this stuff, so that 100 years from now, they will pull this out and say, this is what the artist was doing at that time. I see this wonderful actress sitting in front of me, making relevant plays. But that's a struggle, because I don't know how interested the folks who have the will to support us are willing to support that, because we probably are very threatening. But the artists have always been threatening. We are conspirators. We're constantly challenging the system. But that's the artist's role. And that's why they put us in prison and kill us.
Are we going to end on that? Thank you, Willie.